My name is Erin, and at 34 years old, I never thought I would be raising my 6-year-old son Noah alone after my divorce 3 years ago. But life throws curveballs like the appendectomy that landed me in the hospital when I needed help the most. Instead of being there for us, my parents chose to travel to Greece with my sister Melody. The pain of their rejection still stings. Now they are at my doorstep, faces streaked with tears, begging for my help. Before I get into how my parents showed up at my doorstep, with tear-stained faces, let me know where you are watching from. And hit that subscribe button if family drama stories make you feel better about your own life. I grew up in a cozy suburban neighborhood just outside of Boston. Our house was the typical American dream home with a white picket fence and a backyard big enough for weekend barbecues. My childhood memories are filled with the scent of my mother Diana's famous apple pie and my father Harold's booming laugh during family game nights. But beneath this picture-perfect facade, there was always an unspoken truth that I tried to ignore for many years. My younger sister Melody came along when I was 4 years old. She was born with golden curls and bright blue eyes that made everyone coo and awe wherever we went. From the moment she arrived, it seemed like the spotlight in our family shifted. I was no longer the only star in my parents' universe. Dad worked as a successful investment banker while Mom taught piano lessons from our living room. They provided us with everything we needed materially, but emotionally, there was always this imbalance that I couldn't quite articulate as a child. The disparity in how they treated Melody and me was subtle at first, then became more obvious as the years passed. When I turned 10, I got a small birthday celebration with just our immediate family and a homemade cake. When Melody turned 10, my parents rented out the local skating rink and invited her entire grade. I still remember standing in the corner handing out party favors to kids I barely knew, while my parents fussed over whether Melody was having the perfect day. In high school, I maintained a 4.0 GPA, joined the debate team, and even made it to state finals. My parents attended one debate, just one. Meanwhile, they never missed a single one of Melody's dance recitals, even driving 4 hours to an out-of-state competition when she had a minor role in the ensemble. The college years made the favoritism impossible to deny. Despite my scholarships, I still needed financial help. My parents contributed just enough to cover my dorm fees, explaining that they needed to save for Melody's education, since she probably wouldn't qualify for academic scholarships. I worked 2 part-time jobs throughout college while trying to maintain my grades. Melody ended up at a private university fully funded by our parents, where she changed her major 3 times before settling on communications. I met James during my senior year of college. He was studying architecture, and we bonded over our shared love of design. I was working as a barista then, sketching logo ideas during slow periods. James noticed my drawings and said I had real talent. It was the kind of encouragement I rarely got at home, and I soaked it up like a flower finally getting water after a drought. We married when I was 27, right after I landed my first real job as a junior graphic designer at a marketing firm. My parents gave us a modest check as a wedding gift, which was generous but notably less than what they had already put aside for Melody's future wedding, despite her being single at the time. Noah came along a year later, a beautiful baby boy with James's dark hair and my green eyes. Becoming a mother changed everything for me. Looking into Noah's tiny face, I promised myself I would never make him feel like he was competing for my love. My parents seemed to warm up slightly after Noah was born. They visited occasionally, bringing gifts and taking photos to show their friends. But even those moments were often interrupted by calls from Melody about her latest crisis or accomplishment. Then, when Noah was 3, my world shattered. I discovered James had been having an affair with a coworker. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of the infidelity, but because I had truly believed I had finally found someone who put me first. The divorce was messy and painful, leaving me a single mother with a preschooler and a mountain of legal bills. During this period, my parents were distracted by Melody's engagement to Thomas, a finance executive she had met at a charity gala. Their wedding planning consumed every conversation. When I called my mother in tears after a particularly difficult day in court, she listened for 5 minutes before saying she needed to go because Melody was calling on the other line with news about wedding venues. I realized then that I couldn't count on my parents for emotional support. It was a painful acknowledgement, but also liberating in a strange way. I stopped expecting what they couldn't give and focused on building my own support network. I became closer with my neighbor Amanda, who had 2 children close to Noah's age. We started a babysitting exchange that helped us both save on childcare costs. I reconnected with college friends who lived nearby and joined a single parents group that met twice a month. Slowly, I created a chosen family that showed up for me in ways my biological family never did. Noah and I settled into a routine. I advanced to senior graphic designer at my company, working remotely 2 days a week to reduce childcare expenses. Noah started preschool and made friends easily with his outgoing personality, so different from my own reserved nature as a child. We were managing finding our new normal until that fateful week in spring that would change everything. It was a Friday morning in April when I woke up with a sharp pain in my abdomen. I tried to ignore it getting Noah ready for preschool as usual, but by the time I dropped him off, I was doubled over. The school director noticed and insisted I go to urgent care immediately. She offered to keep Noah in the after-school program if needed. I called my neighbor Amanda from the urgent care parking lot, asking if she could pick up Noah if my appointment ran late. The pain was getting worse, moving from a general ache to a focused, stabbing sensation on my right side. The doctor examined me and immediately suspected appendicitis. She sent me to the emergency room for further tests. By noon, the diagnosis was confirmed. My appendix was inflamed and needed to be removed immediately before it ruptured. The surgeon explained they would need to perform the operation that afternoon, and I would likely stay in the hospital for 2 to 3 days, possibly longer if there were complications. Panic set in. Not about the surgery, but about Noah. Amanda could help for today, but she was leaving town tomorrow for her mother's 70th birthday celebration, a trip planned months in advance. My mind raced through options. My closest friends all had work obligations they couldn't abandon on such short notice. My coworker Sarah had mentioned she could help in emergencies, but she lived 40 minutes away and had her own family obligations. With growing desperation, I called my parents. Dad answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom and Dad, I need your help," I said, my voice shaking. "I am in the hospital with appendicitis. They are taking me into surgery in a few hours and I need someone to watch Noah for the weekend." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by muffled voices. I could tell Dad had put his hand over the receiver and was discussing with Mom. "Erin, this is very sudden," Dad finally replied, his voice tight. "Your mother and I have plans this weekend. Very important plans. I am having surgery," I reminded him, tears of pain and frustration welling in my eyes. "It is an emergency." More muffled consultation. "The thing is," Dad continued, "we are supposed to leave for Greece tomorrow morning. Melody and Thomas invited us to join them for a pre-wedding trip. All the arrangements are made. The tickets are non-refundable." "I can't believe what I am hearing," I said. "My appendix might rupture. I need surgery. Noah needs someone to take care of him. Surely there must be someone else you can ask." Mom chimed in, having apparently taken the phone. "One of your friends? Or maybe James could take Noah for a few days?" "James moved to Seattle after the divorce," I said through gritted teeth. "You know this. Well, what about your neighbor, the one with the children Noah plays with?" "She's going out of town." "Dad, Mom, please. I really need you right now." There was another pause, longer this time. "I'm sorry, Erin," Dad finally said. "We just can't change these plans. Melody went to a lot of trouble to arrange this trip. She would be devastated if we canceled at the last minute. And I won't be devastated lying alone in a hospital while my 6-year-old son has nowhere to go. I shot back anger, temporarily overriding my pain. "Don't be dramatic," Mom said. "You're always so intense about everything. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're resourceful." The conversation ended shortly after with vague promises to call and check on me when they could. I sat in the hospital bed, phone clutched in my trembling hand, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. Desperate, I called my co-worker, Sarah. Despite the distance and her own family obligations, she immediately agreed to take Noah for the weekend. The relief I felt was immense, but it was tinged with bitterness that a work colleague showed more concern for me than my own parents. The hours before surgery were a blur of paperwork, medical explanations, and frantic arrangements. Amanda brought Noah to the hospital so I could explain what was happening. I tried to be brave for him, telling him he would have a fun weekend sleepover at Ms. Sarah's house with her kids while doctors fixed my tummy ache. His little face was so worried, his hand holding mine tightly, as if he could keep me safe through sheer determination. When they wheeled me into surgery, the last thought I had before the anesthesia took effect was not about the procedure or the pain, but about the painful realization that my parents had once again shown me where I stood in their priorities. I woke up hours later, groggy and disoriented, in the recovery room. The surgery had gone well, but the doctor explained they had caught my appendix just before rupture, which meant a slightly longer recovery time and a higher risk of infection. I would need to stay in the hospital for at least 3 days and take it very easy for several weeks afterward. Those days in the hospital were some of the loneliest of my life. Sarah brought Noah to visit once, but it was difficult for her to make the long drive with 3 children in tow. We video chatted several times a day, and seeing Noah's face on my phone screen was both a comfort and a heartache. My parents didn't call until they were already in Greece. The connection was poor, and they spoke mostly about the beautiful views and the wonderful time they were having with Melody and Thomas. They asked briefly how I was feeling before Melody apparently called them away to see something exciting. The call lasted less than 5 minutes. Lying in that hospital bed, I had plenty of time to think about family obligation and love. I thought about Noah and how I would move heaven and earth to be there if he needed me. I thought about my parents and how throughout my life they had consistently chosen Melody's wants over my needs. I thought about what it means to be a parent, and I made a decision that would alter the course of our family dynamic forever. Coming home after surgery was both a relief and a challenge. Sarah drove Noah and me back to our apartment and helped us get settled before heading back to her family. I was grateful for her kindness, but aware that I was now on my own, trying to recover from major surgery while caring for an active 6-year-old. The first few days were brutal. Even small movements sent pain shooting through my abdomen. Simple tasks like making Noah's lunch or helping him bathe became monumental challenges. Noah tried his best to help bringing me water and proudly making peanut butter sandwiches with only minimal mess. His concern for me was touching and heartbreaking. No 6-year-old should have to become a caretaker. We developed a system. Noah would bring things I needed to the couch, where I camped out surrounded by pillows and pain medication. We watched more TV than I normally allowed, but educational shows became our compromise. I read to him for hours, my voice sometimes faltering with fatigue, but determined to maintain some normalcy. My neighbor Amanda returned from her trip and immediately stepped in, bringing us homemade meals and taking Noah to the park to burn off energy. My boss arranged for me to work remotely for an additional 2 weeks beyond my medical leave, recognizing the difficult situation I was in. Throughout all this, my parents remained in Greece. They sent occasional texts asking how I was feeling, but never acknowledged the burden they had placed on me by refusing to help. Instead, my social media feed filled with photos of them enjoying Mediterranean sunsets and elaborate dinners with Melody and Thomas. In one particularly tone-deaf post, my mother wrote about the joys of spending quality time with family and how nothing was more important than being there for the people you love. After 2 weeks of minimal contact, they finally returned home and called to see if they could visit. Something had shifted in me during my recovery. The pain and abandonment I felt had crystallized into a firm resolve. I told them plainly that I wasn't ready to see them yet and needed time to process how they had handled the situation. Dad was defensive, reminding me that the Greece trip had been planned for months, though it had never been mentioned to me before my emergency. Mom suggested I was being overly sensitive and holding grudges, which she said had always been my problem. Neither seemed to grasp the magnitude of what had happened, how they had failed me when I needed them most. That conversation marked the beginning of a new phase in our relationship. I established clear boundaries, limiting our interactions to occasional phone calls and holiday gatherings. I no longer shared my struggles or sought their advice. When they asked about Noah, I gave them positive but vague updates, protecting both him and myself from further disappointment. Instead of dwelling on what my biological family couldn't provide, I invested more deeply in my chosen family. Amanda and I formalized our childcare exchange, creating a reliable system that benefited both our families. I became more involved in Noah's school, joining the PTA and volunteering when my schedule allowed. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones through a working mother's support group. My career began to flourish as well. The remote work arrangement during my recovery had proven successful, and my boss offered me a more flexible schedule permanently. I took on higher-profile projects and began building a portfolio of freelance work that supplemented my income and fulfilled me creatively. 6 months after the surgery, I found an apartment in a better neighborhood closer to Noah's school and to several of our closest friends. It was slightly more expensive, but worth every penny for the improved quality of life and proximity to our support network. Moving felt symbolic, a physical manifestation of moving forward with our lives. Noah occasionally asked about his grandparents and why we didn't see them as often anymore. I was careful not to burden him with adult conflicts, explaining simply that sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out, just like he sometimes needed space from friends after a disagreement. I made sure he understood that none of it was his fault, and that many people loved him deeply. My parents sent birthday and Christmas gifts to Noah, which I accepted graciously for his sake. Our interactions became increasingly superficial. They would call to chat about the weather or share news about distant relatives, carefully avoiding any topics that might lead to deeper emotional territory. My relationship with Melody deteriorated even further. After returning from Greece, she called once to tell me I was being unreasonable about our parents and that I should just get over it. When I tried to explain how their actions had affected me, she interrupted to say she had wedding details to finalize and didn't have time for drama. That was the last real conversation we had. I didn't attend her lavish wedding 3 months later, sending a gift card with a polite note instead. My parents were furious about my absence, claiming I had embarrassed them in front of extended family. I held firm, explaining that I couldn't authentically celebrate her happiness while our relationship was so broken. They didn't understand, or perhaps didn't want to understand. As months turned into years, the sharp pain of betrayal gradually dulled into a sad acceptance. I stopped expecting my family to change and focused instead on building a fulfilling life for Noah and myself. We developed our own traditions and created joyful memories together, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us. 2.5 years passed in this way, with minimal contact with my parents and none with Melody. Noah was thriving in school, making friends easily, and showing a talent for art that made my designer heart proud. I had been promoted to art director at my company and had built a steady freelance client base that allowed us greater financial security. We were doing well, better than I had dared hope during those dark days in the hospital. Then came the phone call that would once again upend our carefully constructed life. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and Noah and I had just finished dinner. He was working on a school art project at the kitchen table, while I cleaned up the comfortable silence between us, punctuated by his occasional questions about which colors would look best together. The ringing phone seemed especially jarring in our peaceful apartment. I didn't recognize the number at first, but something made me answer instead of letting it go to voicemail as I usually did with unknown callers. Erin. It was my father's voice sounding strained and unfamiliar. We need to talk. Something has happened. My first thought was that someone had died, and my stomach dropped. Despite our strained relationship, these were still my parents, my family. What is it? Is everyone okay? I asked, moving to the living room to speak privately. It's Melody, Dad said, his voice breaking. She's gone. Gone? What do you mean, gone? I pressed, confused by his choice of words. She left, he clarified. Left Thomas and the kids. Just packed up and disappeared 3 days ago. I hadn't even known Melody had children. Our estrangement had been so complete that I'd missed the birth of my own niece and nephew. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Wait, she has children? I asked, trying to process this new information. Yes, Amanda is 4 and Michael is 2. Mom interjected, and I realized I was on speakerphone. Melody and Thomas had them quickly after the wedding. We thought you knew. I knew nothing, I said flatly. No one told me. There was an awkward pause before Dad continued. Well, the situation is that Melody emptied their joint bank accounts and left a note saying she needed to find herself. Thomas is devastated, completely blindsided. He's working 60-hour weeks at the investment firm and can't possibly care for the children alone. He's traveling to London tomorrow for an emergency client meeting that he can't reschedule. And what does this have to do with me? I asked, though I was beginning to see where this was heading. We've taken temporary custody of the children, Mom explained. But Erin, we're in our 60s now. We can't keep up with 2 toddlers day and night. Your father's back is getting worse and I simply don't have the energy. We were hoping, Dad continued, his voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard before, that you might be able to help. Just until Melody comes back, or Thomas figures out a more permanent arrangement. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes, as the magnitude of their request sank in. They wanted me to take in 2 small children I'd never met, the offspring of a sister who hadn't spoken to me in years, and brother-in-law I barely knew. You're asking me to take custody of Melody's children? I clarified. Children I've never even met. Just temporarily, Mom said quickly. Melody will come back eventually. She always does. Like she always came back from her study abroad semester or that backpacking trip after college. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice, remembering how those extended adventures had always been funded by my parents, no questions asked. This is different, Dad insisted. She's a mother now. She has responsibilities. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. When I had responsibilities as a mother, my needs were secondary. Now that Melody had abandoned her responsibilities, it was suddenly a crisis requiring all hands on deck. How long has she been gone? I asked. 3 days, Mom repeated. Thomas tried calling her friends, but no one knows where she is. Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and Thomas has no family who can help. His parents are both deceased, and his sister lives in Australia, Dad explained. Erin, there's no one else we can turn to. I glanced back toward the kitchen, where Noah was still absorbed in his art project, blissfully unaware of the conversation that could change our lives. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. I can't just make a decision like this on the spot. There isn't much time, Mom pressed. Thomas leaves tomorrow evening. We can't keep doing this, Erin. Your father's back seized up just from picking up Michael yesterday, and I haven't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch since they arrived. I'll call you back in an hour, I promised, then hung up before they could protest further. I stood in my living room, mind racing. The rational part of me wanted to say no immediately. Why should I rearrange my life to clean up Melody's mess? Why should Noah's stability be disrupted? My parents had chosen Melody over me when I needed them most. Now they expected me to drop everything because she had created a crisis. But another part of me thought about two small children, confused and scared, wondering where their mother had gone. Children who had done nothing wrong, who didn't deserve to suffer for the selfishness of others. I thought about what it would mean for Noah to suddenly have cousins in his life, family connections I had never been able to give him as an only child. I called Amanda, who listened sympathetically and offered practical advice about what taking in two young children would entail. I called my boss to discuss how this might affect my work schedule and what accommodations might be possible. I researched emergency childcare options and looked into whether my apartment lease would even allow 2 additional occupants. When I finally called my parents back, I still hadn't made a decision. I needed more information, more time. I told them I would need to meet the children first and speak with Thomas directly before I could commit to anything. They agreed, sounding relieved that I hadn't outright refused. We arranged for them to bring the children to my apartment the following morning. I spent the night explaining the situation to Noah in simple terms, asking how he would feel about having his cousins visit and possibly stay with us for a while. His easy acceptance and excitement about having playmates made me smile, though I worried about the reality being more complicated than his imagination. The next morning, I cleaned the apartment and prepared the spare room that served as my home office, wondering if it could be converted to a children's bedroom if necessary. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath, preparing to meet my niece and nephew for the first time under the strangest of circumstances. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw were 2 small, tired faces peering up at me. Amanda had Melody's golden curls, but Thomas's serious expression. Michael clutched a worn blue blanket, his thumb firmly in his mouth. Dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he hadn't been sleeping well. Behind them stood my parents, looking older and more haggard than I remembered. "Hi," I said softly, kneeling down to be at eye level with the children. "I'm your Aunt Erin. It's very nice to meet you both." Amanda regarded me suspiciously, while Michael partially hid behind my father's leg. Noah appeared beside me, curious, but respectful of the newcomer's apprehension. "Hi, I'm Noah. Do you want to see my Legos? I built a spaceship that can also be a submarine." This simple, childlike offer broke some of the tension. Amanda's interest visibly piqued, and even Michael's eyes widened slightly. "Can we, Grandpa?" Amanda asked, looking up at my father. "Of course." Dad nodded, relief evident in his expression. Noah led the children to his room, naturally taking on the role of host. As soon as they were out of earshot, I turned to my parents. "Come in and sit down," I said, gesturing to the living room. "We need to talk about this situation." They followed me, both moving stiffly, as if the weight of the past few days had physically compressed them. They sank onto my couch, looking out of place in the bright modern space I had created for Noah and myself. "Start from the beginning," I said, taking a seat across from them. "Tell me exactly what happened." They exchanged glances before my mother began speaking. "Melody and Thomas have been having problems for a while," she admitted. "Nothing serious, just normal marriage stress, especially with 2 young children." "Define normal," I countered. "Because abandoning your family and emptying bank accounts isn't normal marital stress." Dad shifted uncomfortably. There may have been someone else involved. Thomas found text messages on her phone the week before she left. When he confronted her, she denied everything, said he was paranoid. "So, she was having an affair," I stated flatly. "We don't know that for certain," Mom interjected quickly, ever ready to defend Melody. The messages weren't explicit, just overly friendly. I raised an eyebrow, but didn't press the point. The morning she left, she dropped the children at our house, saying she needed a day to herself. Dad continued. "She never came back." Thomas found the note that evening when he returned from work. "And what does the note say exactly?" I asked. More glances between them. "It says she needs time to find herself, that motherhood has suffocated her identity, and that she can't pretend anymore." Mom finally answered. She wrote that she would contact us when she was ready, and not to try finding her. "Has Thomas filed a missing persons report?" "No." Dad shook his head. "The bank withdrawal and note make it clear she left voluntarily, and there have been charges on her credit card at a resort in Cancun." I exhaled, slowly processing everything. So my sister abandoned her husband and 2 small children to run off to a beach resort, possibly with another man, and now you want me to step in and pick up the pieces? "We don't have any other options, Erin," Dad said, a pleading note in his voice. "Thomas has to work. We physically can't manage, and there's no one else." I was just about to respond when Noah led Amanda and Michael back into the living room. Amanda was holding a Lego creation, looking marginally more relaxed than when she'd arrived. "Aunt Erin Noah showed me his Legos, and I built a house," Amanda announced, holding up her colorful construction. "Noah says you have juice. Can I have some juice?" The direct request, so typical of a 4-year-old, momentarily diffused the tension in the room. "Of course you can," I smiled, heading to the kitchen with all 3 children following behind me. As I poured apple juice into small cups, I observed the children's interactions. Noah was naturally taking on a protective role with the younger ones, showing patience I hadn't realized he possessed. Amanda seemed to be warming up to him, while Michael still remained quiet, but had at least abandoned his grandfather's leg in favor of following the older children. When we returned to the living room, the children sat on the floor with their juice, Noah showing them a picture book from his collection. I took the opportunity to continue our conversation. "I understand you're in a difficult position," I said quietly. "But this is a massive request. Taking in 2 young children would completely change our lives. I have a job. Noah has school and activities, and our apartment barely has room." "We know it's asking a lot," Mom acknowledged, "but it would just be until Melody returns or Thomas makes other arrangements. A few weeks at most." "And if Melody doesn't come back?" I challenged. "If Thomas can't find suitable childcare? Then what?" They exchanged another look, and I realized they hadn't thought that far ahead. Or perhaps they had, and were simply not sharing those thoughts with me. "The financial implications alone are significant," I continued. "Childcare for 2 more children would cost thousands, not to mention food, clothes, and everything else they need. Thomas said he would cover all expenses," Dad offered quickly. "He's doing very well at the firm. Money isn't an issue." "This isn't just about money," I sighed. "It's about stability for Noah, about my own mental health, about the fact that I'm being asked to clean up a mess I had no part in creating." Just then, Michael toddled over to me, his small hand reaching out to touch my knee. "Up," he asked, the first word I'd heard him speak. Something twisted in my chest as I looked at his solemn little face. Without thinking, I lifted him onto my lap. He immediately nestled against me, his head resting on my shoulder as if he'd found a safe harbor in a storm. Over his head, I met my parents' eyes, seeing the desperation there. And suddenly, all the memories of my appendicitis crisis came flooding back. The fear and abandonment I'd felt lying in that hospital bed while they explored Greek islands with Melody. "You know," I said, my voice taking on an edge I couldn't suppress, "it's ironic that you're coming to me now asking for this enormous favor when you couldn't even watch Noah for a weekend while I was having emergency surgery." The color drained from my mother's face. "That was different," she protested weakly. "Was it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting it looks remarkably similar. Someone needed help with childcare, and you had to make a choice about your priorities." That trip had been planned for months. Dad began falling back on the same excuse they'd used before. "And this situation wasn't planned at all," I cut him off. "Just like my appendicitis wasn't planned. Emergencies rarely are. The difference is in how we respond to them." Michael shifted in my lap, and I instinctively adjusted my tone, not wanting to upset him. But I couldn't stop now that the floodgates had opened. Do you have any idea what it was like for me? I continued, my voice quieter, but no less intense. Lying in that hospital bed in pain, worried about Noah knowing my own parents chose a vacation over helping their daughter and grandson in a medical emergency. We called to check on you, Mom offered weakly. From Greece, I nodded. For 5 minutes, while showing me the view from your hotel. My parents looked stunned, as if they were truly hearing this perspective for the first time. Perhaps they were. We had never really talked about it, had just allowed the rift to grow and calcify between us. We didn't realize Dad finally said, his voice small. We didn't think it was that serious. I didn't even dignify that with a response. Instead, I looked down at Michael, who had begun to doze against my shoulder, exhausted from days of disrupted routines and emotional stress. Amanda and Noah were still looking through books together, creating a small bubble of normalcy in the midst of our family chaos. I need to speak with Noah alone before I make any decision, I said finally. And I need to talk to Thomas directly. My parents nodded, apparently realizing they were not in a position to make demands. Why don't you take the children for lunch? I suggested. Come back in 2 hours, and I'll have an answer for you. After they left, Noah and I had a serious talk about what it would mean to have his cousins stay with us. His initial excitement about playmates was tempered when I explained they might be with us for weeks or even months, that he would need to share his toys, his space, and my attention. You know how sad you felt when Dad moved away? I asked gently. Amanda and Michael are feeling sad like that because their mom went away too. They need a safe place to stay while their dad works things out. Noah considered this solemnly. Will their mom come back? He asked. I don't know, sweetie. I answered honestly. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that are hard to understand. Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then can we help them until she does, or until they don't feel so sad? His simple compassion brought tears to my eyes. If we do this, it will be hard sometimes. I warned him. Our whole routine will change. He nodded with all the wisdom a 9-year-old could muster. But they're family, right? And you always say, we help family. Out of the mouths of babes. My son was offering the very grace and support that my own parents had withheld from me in my time of need. The irony wasn't lost on me. I called Thomas at work, introducing myself awkwardly as Melody's sister. He sounded exhausted but grateful that I was considering helping. He confirmed he would cover all expenses and was looking into hiring a full-time nanny, but the process would take several weeks at minimum. He offered to meet with me that weekend to discuss details in person. By the time my parents returned with the children, I had made my decision, though it came with strict conditions. I'll help. I told them, as we all sat in the living room, the children once again playing with Noah's toys. But I have terms that aren't negotiable. My parents leaned forward, relief evident on their faces. First, I continued. We're all going to attend family therapy together. This situation with Melody is just the latest in a pattern that needs to be addressed if we're going to function as a family moving forward. Dad looked ready to protest, but Mom placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. Second, I need you both to acknowledge the favoritism you've shown Melody throughout our lives and apologize for how you abandoned me during my medical emergency. Not excuses, not justifications, a genuine acknowledgement and apology. That's not... Dad began, but I cut him off. It's non-negotiable, I repeated firmly. I won't be gaslighted about my own experiences anymore. My mother, surprisingly, was the first to concede. You're right, she said quietly. We haven't been fair to you, Erin, and we should have been there when you needed us during your surgery. I'm sorry. Dad struggled visibly, but finally nodded in agreement. I suppose we have some things to answer for, he admitted. Third, I continued, if I'm taking in Melody's children, you both need to be actively involved. That means regular visits, occasional overnight stays with you to give me breaks, and equal attention to Noah. He's your grandson too, and he deserves the same love and consideration you've given Amanda and Michael. They both nodded quickly at this, apparently finding it the easiest condition to accept. Finally, I need financial help, not just from Thomas, but from you as well. I'll need to hire additional childcare, possibly move to a larger apartment, and make other accommodations. I'm not asking you to pay for everything, but I expect you to contribute. My parents exchanged glances, clearly having not anticipated this request. But after a moment, Dad nodded. That's fair, he agreed. We'll help however we can. With these conditions established, we began making arrangements. Thomas would bring the children's belongings the following day before his trip. My parents would take Amanda and Michael 2 weekends each month and 1 evening per week. I would begin looking into daycares that could accommodate Michael and after-school programs for Amanda. As my parents prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside. You're a better person than I am, she said quietly. After how we treated you, I don't know if I could have been so generous. I'm not doing this for you or for Melody, I replied honestly. I'm doing it for those children and for Noah, who deserves to know his family. And maybe I'm doing it for myself too, to break the cycle of conditional love in our family. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and for the first time in years, she hugged me without reservation. I found myself hugging her back, not quite ready to forgive completely, but willing to start the journey. The first family therapy session was even more revealing than I had anticipated. Seated in the comfortable office of Dr. Larson, a family therapist specializing in intergenerational trauma, my parents initially struggled to open up about the dynamics that had shaped our family for decades. I'd like each of you to share your perspective on the family relationships Dr. Larson began. Erin, would you like to start? I took a deep breath and spoke about growing up in Melody's shadow, always feeling like I was competing for attention and affection that came so easily to my sister. I described the hospital incident in detail, explaining how it had been the breaking point after years of subtle favoritism. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat as I spoke, while my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. When it was their turn to respond, the revelations were surprising. I think we expected more from Erin because she seemed so capable, my father admitted. Melody always needed us more, or at least we thought she did. She was more emotional, more demonstrative about her needs. And she was more like me, my mother added quietly. Erin was always so independent, so much like Harold's side of the family. I suppose I found it harder to connect with her temperament. Dr. Larson guided us through these difficult admissions, helping my parents see how their behavior had impacted me throughout my life. The most painful revelation came when my father acknowledged that part of their favoritism stemmed from fear. Melody needed us, he explained. She still does. It made us feel important, necessary. Erin built her own life, made her own successes. Sometimes it felt like she didn't need us at all, and that was threatening in a way. So you punished me for being self-sufficient? I asked, hurt and confusion evident in my voice. We didn't see it that way at the time, Mom said. But looking back, yes, I think that's exactly what we did. And I'm so sorry, Erin. So deeply sorry. That first session was emotionally exhausting, but cathartic. We left with homework assignments from Dr. Larson and a commitment to continue the process. As difficult as it was, it felt like the first step toward genuine healing. Meanwhile, life at home transformed almost overnight. My 2-bedroom apartment was suddenly filled with children's voices, toys scattered across every surface, and the constant juggling act of managing 3 different schedules. I converted my home office into a bedroom for Amanda and Michael, setting up my work computer in a corner of my bedroom instead. Noah surprised me with his generosity and patience. Though there were inevitably moments of jealousy and frustration, he generally embraced his role as the oldest child, with pride helping Amanda with her shoes, or showing Michael how to build with blocks. Watching him, I felt a surge of pride in the empathetic person he was becoming, despite the challenges he'd faced. Thomas called the children every evening before bedtime, his voice strained but grateful. He visited on weekends, bringing gifts and spending time with Amanda and Michael. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the struggle of trying to balance his demanding career with single parenthood. We developed an unexpected alliance, two adults, trying to provide stability for children whose mother had abandoned them. The legal aspects of the situation were complicated. After 2 weeks without contact, Thomas filed for emergency temporary custody. When Melody still hadn't returned after a month, he began the process of filing for divorce and permanent custody. I was named as the secondary caregiver in the custody arrangement, a role that felt both overwhelming and right. My parents transformed as well, though not without struggle. True to their word, they took the children regularly to give me breaks, and began including Noah in special outings and activities. My father taught him to fish, just as he had once taught Melody's husband. My mother enrolled Noah in piano lessons, discovering his natural talent that had gone unnoticed before. In family therapy, we continued to unpack decades of complicated dynamics. There were difficult sessions where old wounds reopened, sessions where my father stormed out only to return apologetically the following week, sessions where my mother cried through the entire hour. But slowly, incrementally, we began to build a new understanding of each other. The most difficult aspect was explaining Melody's absence to the children, especially Amanda, who was old enough to ask direct questions about when her mommy was coming home. Thomas and I consulted with a child psychologist who helped us frame honest but age-appropriate responses. We never spoke negatively about Melody, but acknowledged that she had made choices that hurt the family, and that we didn't know when or if she would return. 3 months after Melody's departure, we finally received word from her. A brief email to Thomas explained that she was living in Puerto Vallarta with a diving instructor she had met in Cancun. She expressed vague regret about how things had ended, but made no mention of returning or even visiting her children. Thomas forwarded the email to my parents and me without comment, though I could imagine the pain and anger behind his silence. My parents were devastated by this confirmation of Melody's abandonment. In our next therapy session, my father broke down completely. "Where did we go wrong with her?" he asked, his voice cracking. "We gave her everything, supported every decision, every whim. How could she do this to her own children?" Dr. Larson gently suggested that perhaps their unconditional support had not prepared Melody for the realities of adult life and its responsibilities. Sometimes, when we protect our children from all consequences, they don't develop the resilience and character needed to face life's challenges, she explained. And sometimes, despite our best efforts, people make choices we can't understand or control. It was a difficult truth for my parents to accept that their favoritism might have contributed to Melody's sense of entitlement and inability to commit to her responsibilities. For me, there was no satisfaction in this realization, only sadness for the children caught in the aftermath, and hope that we could do better moving forward. 6 months after the children came to live with me, I found a larger 3-bedroom apartment in the same school district. Thomas contributed substantially to the increased rent, and my parents helped with moving expenses. The new place gave everyone more space and helped establish a sense of permanence and stability. Noah's relationship with his grandparents blossomed in ways I had always hoped it would. My mother discovered his artistic talents and began taking him to children's programs at the art museum. My father, learning of Noah's interest in architecture, began building model bridges with him on weekends. The connection that had been missing for years finally began to form. With Amanda and Michael, I found myself growing to love them deeply, not as replacements for their absent mother, but as their aunt, who was committed to their well-being. Amanda's spunky personality and creative imagination reminded me of myself at that age before I had learned to make myself smaller in Melody's shadow. Michael, initially so withdrawn, began to blossom into a talkative, affectionate toddler who followed Noah everywhere. My relationship with my parents transformed as well. The honesty forced by our therapy sessions created space for genuine connection. We still had disagreements and moments of tension, but they were now handled with greater awareness and respect. They acknowledged my boundaries and increasingly sought my input on family decisions. When Thomas approached me about seeking permanent guardianship of Amanda and Michael as their father's designated caregiver in the event anything happened to him, I agreed without hesitation. The legal proceedings formalized what had already become reality. These children were part of my family now, not temporarily, but permanently. In our final therapy session, Dr. Larson asked us to reflect on what we had learned through this difficult journey. "I've learned that family isn't just about blood," my mother said thoughtfully. "It's about who shows up, who stays, who puts in the work even when it's hard. Erin has taught me that. I've learned that it's never too late to try to right past wrongs," my father added. "I can't change how I parented when you girls were young, Erin, but I can be a better grandfather to these children, all of these children now." When it was my turn, I thought carefully before responding. "I've learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're the foundation for healthy relationships. And I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but choosing to create something new from the broken pieces." We ended the session with a group hug that would have seemed impossible months earlier. There were still tears, still pain, but also a genuine sense of hope for our future as a family. 1 year after Melody's departure, Thomas received divorce papers from her attorney. She had decided to remain in Mexico and was relinquishing all parental rights in exchange for Thomas not seeking any financial support from her. It was a devastating final abandonment for Amanda and Michael, though not entirely unexpected, given the complete absence of contact over the preceding year. We held a family meeting to discuss how to handle this news with the children. Noah, now 10 and wise beyond his years, suggested we have a special dinner to remind Amanda and Michael how many people love them, even if their mom couldn't. That dinner became a new family tradition, a celebration of chosen family and resilience. My parents, Thomas, Noah, Amanda, Michael, and I gathered around the table sharing stories and laughter. Looking around at these faces that had become my family in ways I never could have imagined, I felt a sense of peace despite the complicated journey that had brought us here. Melody never returned, never called, never sought to know her children again. It was a wound that would never fully heal for Amanda and Michael, or for my parents. But around that wound, we built a family founded on conscious choice rather than obligation, on showing up rather than walking away. One evening, as I tucked Amanda into bed, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Aunt Erin, are you our mom now?" I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. "No, sweetheart. You have a mom even though she's not here. I'm your aunt who loves you very much and will always take care of you. But you do mom things," she persisted. "You make my lunch and help with homework and kiss my owies." I smiled gently. "Families come in all different shapes, Amanda. Some kids have a mom and dad, some have 2 moms or 2 dads, some have grandparents who raise them, and some like you and Michael have a dad and an aunt who love them very much. What matters isn't the title, but the love." She seemed to consider this her young mind working to make sense of her unconventional family. "I think I'm lucky then," she finally said. "Some kids only have a mom, but I have a dad and an aunt and grandparents and Noah." "Yes," I agreed, blinking back tears. "You have a lot of people who love you very much." As I turned out her light and closed her door, I thought about the strange, painful journey that had led us here. My parents' favoritism toward Melody throughout our childhood. Their choosing her Greek vacation over helping me during my medical emergency. Melody's abandonment of her children. All of these broken places that had somehow improbably led to healing and a new kind of family. I thought of the lesson I hoped to teach these 3 children in my care. That family is defined not by biology alone, but by consistency, by showing up, by putting someone else's needs before your own whims. That love is an action, not just a feeling. That forgiveness is possible without allowing yourself to be hurt again. Most of all, I wanted them to know that second chances must be earned, not given freely. My parents had earned their second chance through genuine remorse, through therapy, through changed behavior. Melody had not sought one at all. In the quiet of that evening, with 3 sleeping children under my roof, and the knowledge that my parents would arrive for Sunday dinner in just a few days, I felt grateful for the family we had built from the broken pieces of the one we had been given. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what any of us had expected, but it was real, and it was ours. I hope this story resonates with some of you who have experienced family favoritism or had to create boundaries with toxic relatives. Have you ever had to step up for family members in a difficult situation? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family healing and boundary setting. Thank you for listening, and remember that family is who shows up, not just who shares your DNA.